challenges that they face, and obviously that's a subject near and dear to the heart of CSOFT. I think you know most of the people on the panel here, so I'm not going to do elaborate discussions. We have Michael, Janet, Yen, Sam, Ben, Will, David, and who's this lady at the end? Security. Do we have security? Well, let me just introduce perhaps the two people that you are not familiar with. Chen Chao is a veteran of the oil and gas industry, but now runs her own consulting firm here in Beijing called Tao Ceramics, which is basically dedicated to helping Chinese companies go global. And we have Mr. Gu Lei, who is a senior vice president at Beijing Auto. He spent many years with the Ford Motor Company, lived in Detroit for many, rather in Dearborn, worked in Dearborn at Ford's headquarters, also worked for Chery back here in China, and now he is a senior VP running R&D at one of the players in the automotive space that has already made real strides toward going global, and obviously has further ambitions down the road. And so, Mr. Gu, let me start with you. We were talking last night at dinner, and you have strong feelings on the subject. Many Chinese companies talk about going global. It's a buzzword here and in Shanghai and wherever Chinese companies are based. But many of them don't really know, frankly, what that means. What are the 2 or 3 things that are critical for top management to keep in mind as they try to pursue the goal of going global?
Well, for this one, I think if all the people now living in China work for a Chinese company, or you will get feeling, all those senior management or CEOs of Chinese local company, they would like to go to global, and what they think mostly is the technology and the hardware or software or those kind of things. And to me, I think there are 2 or 3 things they need to keep in mind. One is the play in a global role. Play global. Second one, I think, is the people. Like people here, globalized. Okay. And I also think the third one is the diversify the culture diversify. And this is also important, because in my career, I used to work for Ford. Ford is truly a globalized company. I can tell the difference. After I come back to China, I worked for Chery for like 5 years, and now moved to Beijing Autos. I can have a big feeling all those senior management of Chinese company. They definitely want to go to global, and also the government push it. No matter it's a private company or the government-owned company, but I think the playing a global role is the most important thing.
Sam, you had thoughts on this sort of?
Yeah, I think as I see it, there are a couple of things very important to define a global company. One is a team from the world develop or make product for the globe, and you not only sell the product to another country, you also, I think, get connected to the local people. I think in this aspect, we can learn from some neighboring country, like Japan and the Korea. They have some good example. They are very good international company. I think I can see CSOFT is going to be one of very successful international company from China.
One of the catchphrases of globalization over the past decades, indeed a cliche, and sometimes cliches are accurate, is think globally, act locally.
I think Mr. Goulet prepared for this question, right? He's put down.
What does it mean to think globally and act locally?
Well, I have a lot of experience on those things, okay? Because I used to work for Ford, it's a global company, and moved back to China, and then you find a lot of things. It's what you mentioned, it's act locally. Actually, it's as a professional, or it's a skill. We need in Chinese company probably need more time to do it. So, for example, in the 2009, there is a worldwide finance crisis, okay? And a lot of Chinese company want to get acquire some outside or worldwide technologies and those kind of things. For bike, we try a lot in 2009. We try to get some Stony Bridge or a lot of things, and Opel and Saab. We try to acquire those technology or company, whatever. But at the beginning, we failed. The issue is, I think there are a lot of things, maybe cultural difference or understanding. Well, the English probably is English, and with different culture, different background, the interpret is different. Okay, so then we fail a lot, and at the end, we have a global team. We got 8 people, mostly engineer like me. Used to work for General Motors, used to work for Ford. Then we have a team. We went to we get it together. We tried. Finally, we talked with Saab to acquire Saab technology. Then we got success. So that means even though a lot of Chinese people, they want to get globally, they are doing, or maybe need a train or timing. Right. To improve, maybe skill or whatever you call it. So there are a lot of things you need to learn. Right. And the other meaning of act locally is also you have momentum. You always you are what the thing you are doing the way used to be success, but when you go into the global world, you may fail. So I think there are a lot of things needed to be addressed in this area.
Yep.
So I think that might be easy to throw in example. Just understand the meaning behind the words. So the language differences, like Mr. Gu said, you say, for example, I think I talked about the crisis. Crisis in English, it means crisis, right? It means 100% crisis. But in Chinese, so we have 2 characters. One is Wei, one is Ji. So Wei really is the risk. Ji is the opportunity. So Chinese look at the crisis as a risk bundled with opportunity. So underneath the line of when maybe American looking at the crisis, the Chinese looking at the crisis a little bit differently, the subtlety behind the words, the meaning. So I guess that's probably the cultural aspect. When even you speak the language, not necessarily understand the culture. This is actually the most challenging part, even in our business, claiming us as an expert, but we also have challenges when we, helping our customers.
Xiao, I'm interested, what are your thoughts as to where on the learning curve Chinese companies are in terms of this think globally, act locally notion?
I would say at a very early stage. The demand, the desire is actually or practically very high, as I agree with Mr. Gu. But it's almost like a dream. Everybody has this dream of going globally, but really has no idea or no concrete idea how to execute it or to make it happen. Okay. So it's gonna go through a couple years to make it happen, but I think with the financial backing from this country, either from the government or from the financial situation here in our businesses in China, it's gonna go through a pretty quick path or pace to get there. When we talk about act locally, we have to look at what are the essence of being locally. I give an example. One of my clients is operating in a very remote area of United States. In the last 10 years, they have been doing global business, but the scope has been really a manufacturing base of certain material. So they've been dealing with global clients, but it's only on the basis of handle over the material or products at the seaports of China. So they've been selling to the global clients, targeting the global customers, but they still operate in the country of China. Then the stage of when it matures, the idea is how can I move my service scope over the boundary and into the frontier of where my customer resides instead of my customer come to my door. Then when they set up operation in the States, in a very remote area, which this material is being utilized, they found they're dealing with a small community that has a certain perception of what is the Chinese company, what can the Chinese company bring to my community. The governance of the laws to the local community, the local industry, the community contribution that you have to fit in so that you don't get the negative press being kicked out for not doing things correctly. You have to hire the local employee to represent your company or your business. Instead, you parachute 10 Chinese people from your company here. So all those elements are small elements. Even for a smaller scale company, they still have to kind of feel their way around and go there. But I think one day it's gonna happen.
Right. No, I think clearly patience is critical to this entire discussion. And actually, Yan, I wanted to ask you. The idea of globalization often gets wrapped up into big brand names. A globalized company is a big brand. It's Toyota, it's Sony, it's Ford, it's GM, it's Apple, Microsoft. Sorry, Will, get them in there. And a question that my editors, for example, are constantly asking me is, well, how come there aren't any, global Chinese brands? And my response to them is often, come on, man, it's 30 years down the road here from when, everything was state-owned and there was no global Chinese presence in anything anywhere. So is it premature to even ask that question?
I think so. Rome is not built in one day. We got to give it more time.
Yeah.
A global brand, you cannot build it just as soon as you can. It has a lot of factors you have to think about it. For example, like Samsung and Hyundai. I mean, these companies have been there forever,
yep.
right? they were not global, like even not a few years ago.
Yeah.
Only these last few years, you see Samsung and Hyundai are doing so great in America. And
It's true.
people buy Hyundai cars. A lot of people don't even know they're a Korean company. So that's the idea of a global brand, and it just doesn't happen, that fast. And think about China. We only have like how many years to open the door and to grow our economy, and only this recent years we're more aggressive on going global, and a lot of companies just have the mission and have the vision to do that, and with time and great things will happen, and great brands, Chinese brands are going to be global brands that everybody's going to recognize everywhere.
It will emerge, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, Ben, you said in your presentation this morning, I think you put a time frame of 10 years on it before we see the emergence of big-time Chinese global brands. That, to me, almost seems maybe a little optimistic. Do you think that 10 years is a reasonable time horizon?
I think 10 years is reasonable for companies that are moving aggressively to make it happen now.
Mm-hmm.
And today is not the starting point. Companies have been working at it for a decade or more. And I guess I think back to what are the timelines that other companies from other countries have followed. And I grew up in a Volvo, and that Volvo was one of the first that had been imported to the United States. It took 10 years of effort for Volvo to really take off as a brand in the United States. And if you look at what Volvo did over those 10 years, it was a relentless effort to identify how they could break out as a brand. And Volvo famously did it on the basis of product safety.
Safety, right.
For those who were in the United States in the early 70s, there was the famous Japanese motorcycle slogan, "Let the good times roll." How many people in this room remember the expression, "Let the good times roll"? And the brand? Kawasaki. So Kawasaki is not an easy name to say in English. But they got to a certain point where the quality reputation was sufficient. They had a breakout marketing campaign. So they put a whole bunch of things together: the product, the image, how they were marketing. And I would frankly say there are some Chinese brands now, including some represented by people in this room today, that are on the cusp of that breakout.
Want to name any names?
I think Huawei is on the cusp of a breakout.
Okay, we have may add a little
There's
to
dissent
that.
on the
We
panel.
have Huawei in the audience.
Yes.
Yeah. I just want to add to what just Ben said. I think Ben was right. Just take a while, for other people to know your technology. But I think just the technology is not enough. I think the culture side of it. There are not a Chinese company right now has a will to go global, but I'm not quite sure they know the mean to become global. And there's more than just money. I noticed some companies run ad in Times Square. I think that's good, but I'm not quite sure it's enough. I think they should, get involved more in the community work, get involved in more school, in some charity work, sponsorship, some sports. I think involve many aspects, not just the product safety of it, or the quality of the goods.
Right.
Yeah.
Jenna, you had thoughts on this subject?
I just thought it was worth mentioning Lenovo, even though they kind of took a backwards play, but they've done a really good job, I think, with their brand since they bought, I think, Pat.
Right. David, I want to put this question to you. One of the many Chinese companies, of course, have and do operate in many markets abroad. In particular, the resource industry, your industry, is very active, the Chinese companies, in what I would describe as sort of hostile or not in developed markets, but in developing markets, in very difficult environments. Many African countries, in the Middle East. There are mining companies active in Afghanistan. Halliburton is a company that operates and has for decades effectively in both what I would describe as hostile environments and in developed, orderly, what I would describe as rule of law-based economies. I realize this is a tough question, but what are the key points for Chinese companies who are looking to move from developing more difficult environments into more orderly environments to keep in mind? What is the key to being able to have a foot in both worlds?
I think that's a very good question. For the Chinese company, I believe they not only need to think globally, but also we're talking about upgrade your client. We think in the consumer market, you're seeing somebody started out with the lowest hanging fruit in the market, then you move up the food chain, getting a better margin, better profit in the developed market. For the Chinese, the energy service company aside, but I think play in the developed world, the corporate governance is one of the top prerequisites the Chinese may or may not have today.
Okay.
I think the Mr. Gu mentioned earlier, you need to play with the global rule, and Janet highlighted some corporate governance issues that highlighted the deficiency in the Chinese company internal control perspective. So I think so far the countries, I believe, recognize that's the issue. So FCPA, for example, the Foreign Corruption Protection Act, is enabled, is being enforced in China as well. So I guess with those kind of a government a push for the Chinese to play by the global rule, eventually we'll see the Chinese company move up the food chain to get into the upgraded market. And I want to say that Halliburton, thank you for recognizing Halliburton being successful in both developing and developing market. But Halliburton, let me remind everybody, we were founded in 1919. Right. We're celebrating our 95 years in history. Right. So when the Chinese company, if you think about a small Chinese company and expecting those guys can acting and fully compete with a company like Halliburton is not unrealistic. It's probably naive. Right. We've got to be patient with those guys. Give those guys time, and then give the time for 10 years. I think depending on the industry, there's a good chance. I think there's a learning curve is definitely being shortened.
Right. I want to turn to the issue of how employees in foreign markets, and let's say in the developed world, who are looking at going to work for Haier, Lenovo, Li-Ning, whoever it may be. How should a foreign trained engineer in the United States or in Western Europe think about going to work for a Chinese company that has the ambition that Mr. Gu was talking about? Should an employee simply look at the salary and benefit package and say, hey, if it's competitive, this company looks pretty good, go for it? Or do you think there's a wariness in foreign markets to go to work for a Chinese multinational that might not yet be that well known, particularly in developed markets?
I think you have the pioneers now coming over, who love the culture. They have that, empire building spirit. They're willing to take risks, and they go for it. They're excited. And they feel that they have the skills, and the strength to make inroads.
Go with it.
Yeah, and to influence the leadership structure. But it's a great question that follows the other question. I don't believe that. Let me phrase it more positively. When the Chinese companies become the place to work, right, because they're recognizing the value of the resources that they have, and they're investing and reinvesting. And again, you look at CSOFT. Wow, wow, the care, the dedication, the support, the love, the respect, and that's what will attract, and that's what will further fuel global recognition, because people will want to work for that company. And that may take time, but I think that that's really a critical factor.
Yeah, Ma, do you have something to add on this question?
Every day I drive to work, I pass the Huawei office in Sunnyvale and Santa Clara area. I don't know which town they're in, but I pass by every day. Every day I'm like, I want to work for this company. So, once the brand is recognized and people know about it, just like Google or Apple, right? A lot of people I don't know how many applications Google get every day, right? For job interviews and everything. But on the other hand, though, I think there's an overall image right now, like China has been on the hot spot for a while, and negative or positive, but there's one thing that you cannot deny is that the economy is growing, there's tons of opportunities, and people recognize that. I mean, personally myself, I'd love to work for a Chinese company, Google or anything. And but also there are some Americans are. I saw a TV program the other day. There was this lady. When she buy things, she looked every single label, and she would never buy anything that's made in China. And it's it's kind of scary, but most people are 99% of the people will buy the product wherever it's made, as long as good quality and good price, and but there are people like that, though. I think as a Chinese company, working for a company is really just an individual. If that company's culture attracts people, and it's well known and taking care of its employee, and it doesn't matter which way it is. Whether it's a Chinese company or American company.
Well, what is this? You work in China and and now based in Singapore, and for obviously a fiercely globally competitive firm. Do you have a sense of how Chinese companies that are going out are perceived among sort of the engineers and talented management type people who might consider going to work for them?
Yeah, I'm a firm believer that people will join an opportunity and they leave a manager. So if you can paint the opportunity for them, they'll join the company. Now they typically leave the manager that's not so great, and that's where companies sometimes fail to invest. But I would argue, listen, the first 3,000 people that joined Facebook didn't join Facebook. They joined the opportunity to transform the social networking in the world. Right. And Facebook didn't have a brand. Same thing for Apple, same thing for Microsoft. When I talk to friends and colleagues that joined Microsoft in '92, Microsoft didn't exist as a global brand, but they joined the vision of what Bill Gates had, which was we want to put a PC on every desktop and every home. Right. And that resonated, that opportunity. And people said, I'll sign up for that. Now, fortunately, many of them stayed because of the management and the continued opportunity. So I'm a firm believer that Chinese companies certainly appeal to maybe not everyone, right, but a big chunk of the population that says, I'm looking for opportunity. I'm not necessarily looking for a brand. Right. If it turns into a global brand, that's all okay too. Yeah. So I'm excited. I'm excited about the opportunity. If you may be head of HR for CSOFT, I could hire as many people as you want. Because I think the vision and the opportunity, the excitement and the passion that you have is unrivaled, whether you're talking about Microsoft, Apple, Huawei, etc. And that's what people are looking for, that opportunity.
I want to just comment on that. At CSOFT, we do offer the opportunity, an opportunity to transform our industry, to transcend. So that's exactly, I 100% agree. The opportunity attracts talent.
I wanted to pick up on something about this topic. I think this is perhaps, to me, the most critical question here. How do Chinese companies attract and retain the best and brightest? And if you're a hot tech startup, you've got a certain value proposition that goes with that, almost by definition. And I would say it does apply to CSOFT as well. But if you're, a large state-owned energy company, or you're making automotive parts, or you're doing something that may be a little less sexy in talent markets, I think Chinese companies, just as any company anywhere in the world that wants to be global, need to think very carefully about what kind of people you want to attract and what kind of people you can attract. And it gets super complicated because you've got industry cultures, professional cultures, national cultures, and there are real differences. So how comfortable people are with hierarchy, what kind of boss they want. Do they want a very directive boss, or do they want to be given a lot of room to explore? Do they value money? Do they value time? Picking up on something I think, Will, you hit really nicely earlier today around fundamentally what incents the kind of behavior, understanding what people really want. Because if my identity as a human being is really tied up with the business card that I can show my parents, and is a fancy multinational logo, that's a potential offer for a company. But if my identity is much more, I want to be doing cool engineering stuff and I don't care much about anything else, that's another possibility. So I go back to thinking about the earlier question about what defines a global company, and I loved the point about rules, because a company needs to be choosing what rules, what norms to create internally, and you've got to target those. It's a choice. You just can't be everything. So taking the time to make that choice, to think through how that choice of fundamentally a talent strategy then informs what's possible for you from a business strategy standpoint. Just incredibly important, not easy.
Right. No question. But on the talent issue, I want to flip it around a little bit and ask both Will and Mr. Gu, and I think actually several people can chime in on this subject, because I think it's really important. Obviously, we all know that China has become, in the past decade, sort of the market of the future for multinational companies all over the world, to the market of the present and continuing the future. It's, for GM, BMW, Samsung's the largest market in the world already. In the last decade, however, you have had the emergence of a whole host of really good China-based companies in, Will, in your space, in IT, search, social media, e-commerce. You've had the emergence of the Chinese auto brands gaining more and more confidence, going out, going global. I am told, and I actually just did a story about this, that the war for talent within China, the war for skilled engineers, managers, scientists, has never been more intense. And retaining people in China, whether for a Microsoft or a Beijing auto or whomever, has never been more challenging, because the best people in this market are just can command a premium, and if you don't meet every last demand that they make as employees, they're gone. They're going to the next guy. Does that fit with your experience?
Yes and no, partially. I would say talent's getting tougher, but great talent's tough everywhere. Great talent is tough to get in the U.S. and Western Europe now, even. So I think the talent struggle is always there. In China, I think we've tried to adjust the opportunity that's available. It's the largest employment market we have outside the U.S. We have several thousand employees in Beijing and Shanghai, both across sales, marketing, R&D. So we really appreciate the talent that's available in the Chinese market. It's fantastic. But I would say our biggest struggle is less about acquiring the talent. It's more about retaining the talent.
Right.
And probably the biggest issue that I ran into when I was here managing was everyone they love the title, and they typically want to manage other people. And they actually don't want to manage other people, because managing people is hard. It's painful. It's unpredictable. My goodness, most people actually don't want to manage people. Most people want to have people reporting to them. That's different. That's really different.
Yeah.
And I would have employees come to me and say, listen, I've been working here 90 days. I'd like to have a management role. And I said, listen, I think you have huge potential, and I think there's a great opportunity for you. But if I have these 3 people report to you, the issue is all 3 of them are going to leave, and then you're going to leave because you don't know how to manage yet. You know how to have people report to you. Then you've got to really get down and say, why do you want this? Is it important for you? Is it important for your parents? Is it important for your business card? Or is it important for experience? And understand that more. And in many cases, they say, hey, listen, my friends are moving up and they have a big title and I need to move up with them. I can fix that for you. You need a title. What do you want to be? And they said, well, it's okay. I can print business cards. They're cheap. So we had that conversation, which is interesting. And then a lot of times it's about parent pressure as well. And let's go to dinner with your parents. Let me talk to them about the impact that you have, not just at Microsoft China, but Microsoft worldwide. Because some of the things you're doing, I take back to the United States and replicate out from here.
Right.
And they go, oh, wow, that's interesting. And so I think it's finding what's that core motivator that actually drives people to make the adjustments and changes. That requires a lot of questions, and it requires a lot of listening, and it requires you to really disconnect from a lot of assumptions that you may have in your home culture. But I would say the talent market is vicious everywhere. The acquisition is easier. The retainment is very, very difficult no matter where you are.
Mr. Gu, has it become easier for Beijing Automotive to recruit and retain top people relative compared to GM, SAIC, Volkswagen? Have you emerged as a more formidable competitor for people in the China market, which is so important to every competitor in your industry?
Well, automotive industry is a little bit different with US. Definitely, we need a lot of talented people, and the bike has a strategy to do this. Mm-hmm. But I think still, in China, right now, for automotive, you need a lot of people, a lot of areas, not only technology, maybe purchase, sales, whatever, or management. But in China, it's strange, for automotive industry or OEMs, all the local OEMs has problem to keep people.
And why is that? Why do they have problems?
It's definitely first of all, it's a rapidly growing industry in China, and secondly, it's short of people. There are only those people there, only certain numbers of people there. But in Beijing is much easier. I used to work for Chery in Wuhu, Anhui. it's probably every year in the technology center, you may have like 30-40% turnaround. Okay, and now in Beijing, it's much better. It's only like 5%.
Yeah, people want to work here. Yeah.
So I want to say, in Beijing, we can offer not only competitive salary, but also location,
Right.
and opportunities, as all those people say. And we are not only short of the technology personnel. I think also the skillful worker. We always talk about the high level people, but
Quite right.
in China, in the future, I think this is also important. Who has the skillful worker probably has the future.
And you used the phrase shortage of people, and my editors, when I try to reinforce this point to them, they go, "But you live in a country with 1.3 billion people. How in the hell can there be a shortage?" But you're right, but this is what everyone was telling me on this story. Whether it be a Chinese company or a foreign company, I got the same message the whole time. Sam, you got some thoughts on this subject?
Yeah, you're exactly right. We're shooting people, and sometimes we go to job fair, and actually very few people stop by. The whole hall is almost empty. I don't know. Yeah, where is people went to? It's very strange. And every year you hear a lot of new graduate. Very hard to find job. But the people you want, you have to chase them. That's the first spot. And I have some personal experience. I graduated in England, but I was recruited to Denmark by a U.S. company. It's very difficult to find somebody in Denmark. So I think a lot of company in Beijing, like a Chinese company, they are recruiting a lot of people overseas as well. If we cannot find the people locally, then we have to look somewhere else to find the talent. As Will put it correctly, even more important is how to retain them. I always like watch basketball. And so when you put people together, and you have to ask why they get together to play the ball. I think people like to play winning team. They want the ring, and so if you put good people together, they feel at the end of the day they can achieve something, and they like to stay there, because the money attract us or other people to the company. I think everyone want a sense of achievement. I think that's another factor to keep people around.
Yeah, can I add something?
Yeah.
I recently saw some statistics, and I think it's encouraging to send it to all the CSOFT employees. Even we're talking about the shortage of laborers, it doesn't mean that anything for you guys out there, because CSOFT is always the good choice, the best choice. The statistics by the Asian Labor Bureau has indicated by the fourth quarter of 2010, the percentage of Chinese employees who are willing to work for the multinational companies versus the domestic companies has to reach to equally 32%. Okay, so the gap was closed from 43% of people wants to work for the MNCs, and 9% wants to work for the domestic companies. By Q4 2010, this percentage has to reach the equal point of 32%.
Really? That's fascinating. Wow.
That's great news for what we talk about here, because no longer we need the talents in the overseas markets for our Chinese companies' globalization efforts, but we also need our Chinese young, capable talents to help this corporate incorporate the center of the Chinese companies to go overseas. So we need the both traffic. So which means that the local company, the Chinese companies, are equally as attractive as MNC today. They must have done something right. You know, when I started my job, I was looking for MNC. I didn't want to work for a Chinese company because I feel like I like the culture, I like the globalization, I'm motivated to do new things and challenges. I'm being exposed with more opportunities to see the world. So what has that changed with the Chinese companies to reach to this equal percentage of interest? Does it mean that the Chinese companies are going global, are presenting equally as attractive as opportunity nowadays to the young and capable workforce of China? I think the answer is yes.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
So that's very, very encouraging news that, you know, we're talking about, we want to help the Chinese company to global, and we're short of talent to do so. Is the interest there from the workforce? The answer is definitely positive.
Right, and that's one of the things that need to happen for, and you were saying that, you know, we need to be patient, but clearly that's a signpost along the road that things are moving in that direction. That's really interesting. Michael, you had.
My son has the same problem here in Beijing. It's that finding the right talent. But he's in an industrial design services industry, branding, retail shop design, stuff like that. You need a special kind of person. And as China's economy moves more towards service-oriented, I think that what John said is spot on. That churn, that experience that you will pick up, these are the very soft skills that China needs to accelerate that growth. They will become more confident. They don't have the confidence today in many of these industry sectors where you need to be more creative, you need to be more comfortable, you need to be more provocative, you need to not question the client, for example, who will take everything for nothing, and that's what I want, right? Yes, and then they go back and say, oh, well, we have to do this. We can't do that, that kind of push and pull.
David, I want to ask you a question. What is your sense of, just related to this, what is your sense of how your employees view Halliburton relative to potential Chinese competitors, and how has it changed at all in the last couple of years?
It's a good question. Actually, the top threat of Halliburton talent today is not our international competitors. For some good reason, we're not losing our employee to Baker Hughes, Weatherford, Slimbiger, the big other names. We brainwash our guys pretty well. Actually, we're losing our employees to the Chinese private companies because they typically offer very attractive short-term incentive, which Halliburton cannot match. The other thing is that within Halliburton, we have no shortage of career progression path. But people got to be patient to take those required competency build-up process. But the private company seems to offer a different tempo of instant success. So that translate, combine that with the fact of the sharp increase of the price in China, that becomes a very severe distraction we have to face it today. Another one thing I want to mention is we talk about globalization. We don't think about the MAC localization in China, because that's another way of the globalization. For example, China, Halliburton today, we started out from about 140 of employees are from different nationals.
Right.
Today we have 30 expats, we have maybe 50 or 60 commuters, and we have very aggressive nationalization plan. We want Chinese to write China country. So that's from MNC, maybe from Halliburton perspective, that's our strategy to localize, to go on our track globalization. So put that into perspective, earlier question on how the Chinese company should retain employees overseas. I believe for the Chinese company, you need to have a mentality. When you hire locally, you need to act locally, have a long-term plan of those local employees. Because I can, I met with some NOC guys in Houston. Yeah. They introduced, okay, yeah, 5 of us are from Beijing, the other are just we locally hired. That's kind of a comment that's really concerning because sometimes the Chinese company still does not have a long-term plan of the international employee yet. I think that the mindset needs to change. You have to incorporate those guys into your core team, consider those guys your core management or core competencies, so that way you can have those international employees have a long-term growth plan together with the organization.
Right. So, and do you, David, and localization in terms of the employee base is something that's across the Fortune 500 spectrum over the past 4 to 5 years, accelerated by the financial crisis, no question. But nonetheless, as a strategic choice, that's one companies are making. Do you also offer opportunities, make it clear to your China-based talent base that if they so choose, they have opportunities to work, whether it be in Houston or Dubai or wherever, yeah. that there's not a China ceiling on them, they can go wherever they want within the Halliburton universe?
Good question, Bill. For us, our strategy, in order to localize, you have to globalize local first. Globalize locals, you find a young, good, talented Chinese employee, send them overseas, get those guys having international exposure so they can come back with a more open mind. And I personally benefit from that assignment myself. Obviously, I joined Halliburton in China 3 years ago, and then 7 to Houston, and 7, 8 years in Houston, coming back around the country. So, and we're seeing that path for our employees. We send those guys overseas, get them exposed to the corporate cultures, especially the corporate governance. And if you live in the U.S., you operate in the developed world long enough, those corporate governance things just sink into your culture. You don't take those as for granted. So I think bring that, I guess, the globalized knowledge back into China. That will help you to offset the risk, which we call it over-localize. Sometimes you don't want to over-localize a global brand as well.
And that reflects. I mean, I interviewed companies ranging from Cisco to Alcatel-Lucent to Samsung, and they echo much of what you said there very much. I'm a journalist. I like to ask 30,000 feet questions. So that's the next one on my list here, and this is something that probably most of you on the panel can deal with. But Will, I'm going to start with you. As a representative of Microsoft in many ways is emblematic of a company that if it hasn't necessarily bet the ranch on China, it's a big bet. GM, BMW, Santa, go down the list, Apple. This is the critical foreign market. Mr. Gu, Ford recently announced a $500 million expansion of their investment in Chongqing. A few weeks later, Chongqing was on the front page of every newspaper in the world, and not because Ford had announced a $500 million expansion. The question is there any chance that either for economic reasons that we are going to hit a hard landing here unexpectedly, as Jim Chanos and other bears would argue, or even for political reasons? Is it possible that the China bet for multinational corporations could turn out to be a bad one? Is it even conceivable? I'm sure you'll say yes.
Yes. Mr. Gu? Yeah, every market we look at political, economic, and social stability. Those are just absolutely critical to do business, whether it's from New Zealand in the south up to Korea in the north. And so those are three environments that we look at. There's certainly some economic risk. I look at economic risk and say, yeah, there's some short-term economic risk, but if I look at over the next 30 years, do I have concerns that China is not going to be a rising power? Absolutely not. And I always think it's interesting when people talk about China as a rising power, because if you look over 500 years, actually, India and China shared the crown for the highest share of worldwide GDP back in the 1300s, maybe 1400s, sorry. And so I look at it and say it's the business cycle might be longer than what we normally define a business cycle, but sure, there could be some bumps, but I don't think there's long-term implications, maybe some hiccups. Politically, I think the government has done a fantastic job of balancing the rapid growth with the mass migration and just the transformation that's happened. There are two jobs that I certainly would want, the government in the U.S. and the government in China.
Absolutely.
Because both are really, really hard. And I've always been impressed with what the Chinese government has done in balancing the needs of the transition with the needs of the broader population. And so I don't see a ton of risk on the political side either. So for me, yeah, certainly there's some short-term risk, which Jim Chanos might be calling out. But if I look over certainly 10, 20, 30 years, I think the risk is relatively small, and we are making bigger and bigger investments in China. For us, we probably have an additional risk around intellectual property, which is our business. That's all we have. People joke with me and they say, you sell air. And at some level, we do sell air because you have access to everything that we create, typically even before it's commercially available. So before I can sell it to you, you have access to it.
Yep.
That's selling air. Because I'm trying to get money from you and you have it. That's tough. And so intellectual property is critical for us. But we've seen great strides in China. I think as the software industry is developed, and there's some strong local competitors with Ufida, Longtalk was mentioned, CSOFT, and several other local players. And the government realizes, wait, if I want Ufida to be a global player in software and intellectual property, protection starts at home. Otherwise, they can't be successful abroad. So I think we're making good strides, but there'll be bumps, no doubt.
Right. Go ahead.
Well, this is hard work, but I can tell, because I worked for the government-owned company. The politics is number one. But I will say, everything, the politics should be considered, not only the finance or whatever. This is what we call the rigid war. You cannot go away.
Region war?
Rigid war.
Right.
So in many cases, when you deal with anything, you deal with the marketing, you deal with technology, whatever, you have to think about it. This rigid war is there. I will say, in the past few years, the rigid war is getting weak and weak. But it's still there. So I agree with Williams. In the 20, 30 years, you won't have to worry about it. But right now, it's still the key factor.
Still a factor, yeah.
You have to consider.
Okay.
Can I just comment? Because the other night, Ms. Gu, I remember with 3 hours discussion, and Ms. Gu said, for a lot of Chinese companies, look, globalization, going global, it's just a concept, a dream. They love to talk about it, but in reality, he said it's still a long way. But I asked him a question. I said, so how about the Beijing Auto? Are you progressing? And he confidently said yes. I say, many of them will fail, some will succeed. And I said, what about the Beijing Auto? And he said, yes, will succeed. So I was wondering, so what behind that confidence you think? Is that because you running it?
What has come before us, the previous 30 years, are going to be very different than the next 30 years here. Is there any chance in your view that this goes off the rails in a serious way?
The last 30 years in China is growing rapidly, growing very fast. I think there are a lot of key elements. One is the labor.
Right.
Okay.
Cheap labor. Right.
Cheap labor over there, but we know right now we don't have it.
That era is over.
It's over.
Yeah.
Okay. And also we got a lot of issues with environmental issues, a lot of those kind of things. So in the next 10 or next 30 years, definitely it's different from last 30 years or the past 30 years.
Ben?
Yeah, I would add to that, and this is something we talked about earlier in the week. I think there is a risk of disincenting action to shift to productivity as the driver of growth, which would come through, basically if political risk pushes people who are entrepreneurial and have money away from investing in businesses in China, it could be a serious detriment to the country's growth overall. So, I think this fits very well with what Mr. Gu is saying about sort of the regional war. Regional wars are still going on. There's still political infighting for investment. There are some scenarios that I would not put a high chance of, but a non-zero chance of playing out in which a combination of political infighting, increasing rather than decreasing state control of the economy, pushes entrepreneurial, forward-thinking, bright people away from investment and productivity. And it could go the wrong way.
And that is a useful segue into my next 30,000 feet question. And anyone on the panel can take it. Going forward, what are the one or two things that need to happen here in order for, one, China to increase its global profile as an economic competitor and to maintain the economic dynamism of the domestic market? If you had to pick one, two, or even three things that need to happen as the government transition happens later this year and early next year, what are the things that we need to look for to know that this transition is going to be effective? Anyone want to take that?
Okay, I just throw definitely get more than two.
Okay.
I would say the education system. I think the Chinese education system needs some fundamental revamp to make the young talent stay competitive in today's age. I think America are encouraging creativity, but the China education system seems to be, when I was at college, conformity is a virtue. So I think our education system penalizes outliers, and so it's really not to think about a Chinese college student and another Steve Jobs or Bill Gates.
Thank you.
And coming out of China, a question, and that becomes a qualifier to determine their future lifestyle in 4 or 5 decades down the road. So I think that fundamentally, the education system got to change. That way you can, we talk about growth rapidly. You have some innovation. You got to start it from education.
Well, going back to Bill's question, offering a couple of, or even, like David said, definitely more than 2 or 3. So, this morning you heard CSOFT announce CSOFT steps. As a little steps, I personally involved talking to close to a dozen of state-owned leading private Chinese multinational company, ready company. And then I think they do need a little steps, going there. And one of the things I strongly recommend, company that do, when you start to hire, international talent, please get rid of your foreign department, the name. I joked with Meg and saying they could install a little cafe because the culture is really a big foundation that could help maybe a little thing to transcend and the culture. So
maybe it could be McDonald's, right, Sam? You put a McDonald's. No, maybe not.
no.
When I deal, because most of my clients are smaller companies, small to mid-sized companies,
right.
are private owned.
Right.
I have experienced the level of support from the local government once they identify some star companies that are private companies. They really align a lot of support behind them and trying to help them to take off.
What sort of support?
Well, the support can be awards for the top generators of the revenue, the foreign currency, environmental, in protection. If they got reimbursement of going overseas for a show or setting up offices, the government will actually chip in money to give them an award to help so. But that's on the monetary wise, but also from, for example, they need local resources, the ores, the raw materials, which is at a shortage, at a hard competition with other provinces, for example, or other countries. The government will foster a cooperation between the company with the raw material suppliers to support with the stable continued supply. And also, when it comes to the financing support, they will line up banks, state-owned banks or private banks, export banks, to introduce this kind of relationship and introduce lower rate of interest, so they can get access to loans. There's many things that the government is trying to do so, which I think is pretty neat. Okay, and I almost think that it's almost like uneven or unfair competition if there's equivalent of such a company overseas. They don't get this type of support from their government, but here in China. But with that said, I'm just saying I forgot about the statistics of what percent of GDP is the private sector business, which accounts for the total GDP of China. I don't know that, but I remember one guy who was the province governor or something. He's talking about there's 90% of the labor is actually working for the private companies.
90%?
90%. So the globalization is not just the state-owned companies. There's a lot of energy and the desire and the potential for the smaller company which tend to have a very short decision-making process. They be very flexible and quick to make decisions to push forward. So that group of people worth watching for, and they could be the next enabler of another wave of growth for the Chinese economy.
Yeah, this is a critically important point, and it's fascinating that you say that you see concrete evidence already of local and provincial governments getting behind private enterprise, because the criticism certainly of the last 5 years has been that this has been all force-fed, state-run industrial growth, and it's been very difficult for private entrepreneurs.
Private companies
to
have
get
been being left out,
Yeah.
not being supported enough.
Yeah.
But I think the government nowadays realize that they have to do something to really drive this sector.
Right.
So I think that's a great
And
opportunity.
I think the working assumption is, we'll see if it turns out to be true, but the working assumption is that the next government will even reinforce that. Let's hope.
Well, that can be testified by the financial reform happening in Wenzhou. That's one of the
experiment
things.
in Wenzhou,
Yes.
yeah.
One other thing I would add, and Sam, you might have a good perspective on this, but my experience in working here as well is something needs to be done around healthcare. Because I had people on my team that had the compensation of middle class, but the consumption of lower class, if you will. because of the fear about an illness that would devastate themselves or their family from a healthcare. So there's a concern about, hey, is it going to be there when I need it? Therefore, I save significantly more than I need to, and that consumption's pulled out of the economy. So as China makes the transition to be less export-driven and more consumption-driven, you've got to unlock that the power to consume, and it's indirectly at some level driven by the healthcare concern, which is only going to get worse given the statistics that Sam showed about the aging population by 2050. Where you see, and then the fact that 90% of the healthcare is spent in the last 10%. So that's an interesting, I think, challenge to navigate. I certainly don't have the answer. I don't know if you have a perspective on that either, Sam, but that seems to be a challenge for me that needs to be overcome.
Yeah, I mean, I dare to mention one thing is, you asked about any factor that may affect the success of the global company. Here, I think everybody knows the social stability is very, very important, and it's not only for global companies, also for all the people in the country. I think the government is doing their best to have a stable society. I think they are doing political reform, and as I mentioned, they are trying very hard to fix the healthcare problem, and also try to curb some of the corruption issue, and we all know it's damaging to the economy, to the society. So
particularly pronounced in the healthcare sector, corruption.
Exactly, and but I think eventually the government will get it right, and so.
I do want to jump in here really quickly to make sure that we have enough time for the audience. If anybody in the audience has any questions, comments. Everybody alive? Any of our panelists have any last comments or any questions to other panelists, or even Bill?
Melissa, I have a quick question. This one's actually for you, Bill. Okay. Since you've been asking all the questions, you've interviewed many companies throughout your lifetime, and I wondered if you could compare CSOFT to one of the companies that you've interviewed in the past. No, I'm curious to know what type of company at this stage in our life we're at, and possibly looking 5 years down the road where we could become.
Well, I think it has a very sort of Silicon Valley feel to it, and in all the positive ways, I would say. It's also, I think it's a company that's very open and accessible to not only all your constituents, but to the press. And I think that is smart public relations, frankly. There are very few large multinationals that I've come across in my time as a journalist where that have this sort of feel to it outside of the valley. Actually, David, long ago I was a cub reporter in the Houston bureau covering energy for Business Week magazine, and in those days the CEO of Chevron was a guy named George Keller. Obviously a massive multinational company. And if you were, from the establishment, U.S. Press, Business Week, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, you could call George Keller, the CEO then named George Keller. He's actually the father of Bill Keller, who went on to become the editor of the New York Times. You could call the CEO on the phone directly without going to the PR department, and if he was there, and he had time, he would pick up and answer whatever question you had. So, Sinead, I think, okay, so you should be your role model.
I'll my cell phone.
Okay.
24/7. All year long. Anytime, any question.
But no, it's a critical, so the vibe I get from the corporate culture here is very positive.
Which I consider is a Chinese international company ready to going global. You know, Huawei. Actually, we have a couple of guests in the audience. I was wondering whether Carol or Wenmei would like to comment on how your view of Huawei going global.
We're already global. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think you know that actually your panel discussion is very informative to us, actually, and Huawei has been trying very hard to go global in the past, especially in the past 10 years. But you know that we are still trying very hard, almost struggling, because currently we have 30,000 local employees working with us. So what we are trying to do is to find some common belief which are held by the Chinese people and also the local employees. So we have some the common core values, we call it core values. And actually the core values is they are actually summarized by all the employees inside Huawei after a very long term of a discussion among Huawei people. So I think that process is also a step for all the employees to understand what are the core values. It is not the core values formulated by the high executives. They are the common core values which came up with through hot discussions by all the employees. So I think that is one of the most important things for Huawei as a company to go global.
You know, is there some corporate essence that transcends and is in every culture that we should look to, or will it be different culture to culture? And you know, for me, looking at it, it's you know, quality and compliance. You know, some of these that you think of as international barometers that you have to measure up to. But yeah.
Well, my reaction to that is that would be to echo something that Will said, that the thing that I think surpasses culture and nations is the ability for companies to paint a vision, to paint a compelling vision. And if you can establish what are the core values that the company is trying to live by, and if it's quality and reliability, and just something you can count on this company every time, every day, 24/7, those are very good core values. And it doesn't matter whether the company is based in Beijing or Boston or Buenos Aires. I mean, that's what globalization is. It seems to me there are values that transcend national boundaries.
Just to build on what Bill has said, and I think it directly relates to what you're asking. I've interviewed a lot of globalization companies. It's the vision. CSOFT's vision, Shuni's vision, what you're doing to this industry, and the fact that you're in China. You're putting the bar. It's sort of go back to a comment that Shuni made earlier about Roger Janti. He had a vision that was 12 years ahead of its time. I think that CSOFT's vision is 20 years, easily. You're just moving the bar, and it's extremely impressive. But the most important thing is, in my opinion, you're practicing what you preach internally. You're honoring people. You're nurturing people. You're giving them, yeah, you're working them hard, I'm sure. But you're loving them. It's nice. People are smiling. And people are working hard because they believe in that vision. That's cool.
May I say forward? I think I put it very right, but I have to say that again. it's not because this is Friday afternoon, I want to make Shani happy, have a nice weekend, but I think just like Bill Gates defined Microsoft, Warren Buffett defined his company. I think CSOFT is defined by Shani and Carl. And as I view it, because I happen to be their friend for years, and I kind of feel when the company had 15 people, it was a global company. Now it's 400 people. I think it's just a bigger global company. And when you reach 1,000 people, I think it's an even bigger global company. It's genetic. Some company may have 10,000, 40,000 people. They are not really a global company. I think it's something to do with the mentality of the founder, and it's genetic. It's there from an early day.
I just want to thank all the speakers and Bill and many speakers being dear friends, and of course with school not only friends, we also work together to really doing the work. And I feel as much as we're sharing, as for CSOFT, I can say confidently we learned a lot from the session ourselves. You all agree?